Hi, this presentation is about food traceability in the EU. Food traceability was introduced as a compulsory requirement of food safety in the EU in Regulation 178/2002, in 2002. When we notified the project, the draft of Regulation 178/2002 to WTO, in 2001, there was a lot of surprise because no country around the world was providing for compulsory traceability for the purpose of food safety. Traceability was known in quality management, most importantly. There's an ISO standard from 1992 on traceability, but it was never required in food safety. We did introduce it because we learned the hard way that without traceability, you don't have a secure food safety system. Food safety can serve many other purposes. Quality, as I said, tracing, for instance, organic production. How do you know a product is organic? Because of traceability. How do you know that it is really coming from the origin which is claiming with a geographic indication? Because of traceability. Here, it's been introduced for the purpose of food safety. So it's Regulation 18 Article 18 of Regulation 178/2002, which lays down that traceability is the ability to trace or follow a food, a feed, a food-producing animal, or a substance intended to be or expected to be present in the food, an ingredient if you want, through all stages of production, processing, and distribution. All actors in the food chain are concerned by food traceability. What does it mean in practice for business operators? Firstly, any food business operator must be able to identify the persons from whom they have been supplied. You need to be able to tell the authorities, if requested, who were the suppliers of the food, of the ingredients, of any substance which has come into the making of a food. And to this end, they must be able to demonstrate to the authorities the origin of the ingredients or of the food that they've been using. I will come back later on the issue of how do you do that. And we will see that there's a lot of flexibility. This is what we call traceability one step back in the food chain. Secondly, and I'm quoting from Article 18 of the regulation, food and feed business operator must be able to identify the other businesses to which they have supplied products. And again, they have to be able to tell this information to the authorities if on request from the authorities. This is what we call one step forward. This time we're going down the food chain. One important question is, does it apply to operators in non-EU countries, outside of the EU? The answer is easy, no, because the EU cannot regulate for operators outside of the EU. We don't have the competence and it would be unenforceable anyway. So what it means is that the obligation falls on the last business operator in the EU, an exporter. He or she has to be able to tell from whom they've been supplied in the EU and to whom they have supplied, one step forward, outside of the EU. They must be able to identify the business operator located outside of the EU to whom they have supplied. But this business operator in a non-EU country does not have an obligation of traceability under the regulation. And similarly, in the case of a food imported from a non-EU country, the obligation of traceability is on the first importer in the EU. He or she must be able to identify from whom they've been supplied outside of the EU, one step back, and they must be able to provide information about to whom they have supplied in the EU, one step forward. So the traceability requirements of Regulation 178/2002 do not apply outside of the EU. There may be specific regulation in animal health, for instance, who provide a more in-depth traceability requirements, but not as a matter of principle for all food and feed and ingredients provided into the EU. A second difficult question is, do business operators have to provide what we call internal traceability? In other terms, must they be able to match input with output? I'll give you an example. Let's say that an operator is collecting milk from 6 suppliers to make cheese, and he's also supplying the cheese which he has produced to 6 customers A, B, C, D, E, and he's getting the milk from suppliers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Suppose that there is a food safety incident in one of the supplier 2, for instance, and is informed about the problem, a contamination with Salmonella, E. coli, something like that. If he doesn't have internal traceability, he will have to inform all of his suppliers, because the milk which was contaminated has been used to make cheese, and because there is no internal traceability, this cheese may have gone to any of his 6 customers. Now, this may mean one customer in Portugal, another one in Greece, one in China, and one in Vietnam. So it may make a very big difference in terms of the impact of a food safety crisis. However, if my operator, my cheese producer, has internal traceability, he will know that the milk which was contaminated has gone into the production of the cheese, which has gone to one customer B in my slide here. So with internal traceability, you know that the risk which has occurred has provided a problem with your customer in Portugal or in Greece or in China. And of course, you don't have to organize a recall or a withdrawal with all your producer. Similarly, if you discover a problem on the marketplace, you discover the problem with one of the customers which inform you that the product contaminated. If you don't have internal traceability, you will have to ask all of your suppliers to check their production, their milk, because the problem may have come with the milk from any of them. If you have internal traceability, you will know that the contaminated milk, which has produced the problem in the cheese which has been supplied to customer B, comes from only one of your suppliers, in this case supplier 4. So again, food traceability, internal food traceability, being able to match input with output makes it much easier in case of a recall. But is it compulsory under the regulation Article 18? The answer is no, because the regulation has provided the 2 obligations separately. One step back in paragraph 2, one step forward in paragraph 2. If we had mixed, when drafting the regulation, the 2 obligations in one legal obligation, then you could have said the regulation imposes internal traceability, but it's not the case. And of course, internal traceability would probably be over the top if it was imposed to all business operators for all products, including biscuits and wine and everything, because that would be, of course, business operators can always organize internal traceability. They may do that for food safety, to limit a recall, as I've just explained. They may also do that to get a better intelligence on their production, economic data, quality data, and the like. But that is their own choice. So the regulation, as understood by the Commission, which has put that principle in a guideline from Regulation 178, doesn't impose internal traceability across the food chain. But internal traceability may be required for some products, and again, we will see that it's the case in plant health, in animal health, but that is specific legislation with specific objectives and therefore specific system, and they will be discussed in this conference for the presentation. So obligation under the regulation, one step back, one step forward. And thirdly, labeling. All products must be labeled to facilitate traceability, document information. Again, it's not very specific, as long as it is possible to identify a product through basic labeling. This has nothing to do with food labeling, food information to consumer, that we will see in another presentation. That is information for the consumer on the package. Here we talk about operations between business operators. There's minimum labeling requirements laid down by the regulation. Practically, for day-to-day use, traceability often goes through the batch number. This is laid down in the directive from 1989, and it provides that every prepared foodstuff must bear a batch number, a lot number if you prefer, which is on the package. Of course, this makes it much easier because you don't have to go one step back or one step forward. If you know the batch number, you go directly to the producer, and he will give you all the details about the date it was produced, who was on duty, what are the ingredients that were used, and so on. So the batch number looks as this. The L is typically starting, this is a convention, not obligatory by the legislation, start the lot number. Then there is a letter for the year of production. Then the batch number itself, 5-digit, and finally a sequential code for each product. Typically, the date of production is also joined with the batch number, and in some cases, the date of production can be the batch number. Typically, if you have a cycle with 1 day of production, the batch number, identified by the date, year, month, and day, can serve for the purpose of the batch number. This is essentially for prepared, pre-packed foodstuff, everything that goes pre-packed on the market. How is traceability organized? I've mentioned it already. Regulation is non-prescriptive. It doesn't detail how you have to organize that in general for all food. But of course, specific requirements can be laid down for specific products. Live animals, for instance. Typically, beef meat must be labeled with the origin, country of production, country of raising the animal, and the country of slaughtering. Fruits and vegetables also. And I will give 2 examples, fish and eggs, how specific traceability requirements apply for this sector. For a fish, for instance, you need to put the commercial designation of the species in the language understood by the consumer and the Latin name, because it's the Latin name which allows to identify specifically which fish. So, for instance, in my example here, you can have tuna, salmon, tiger prawns. You also need to put compulsory, for fish that goes to the final consumer, the production method, like caught in the wild, in the sea, or caught in a lake or in a river. Then you have to specify caught in fresh water, as opposed to caught at sea. And finally, you must put if it's been farmed or cultivated for aquaculture. If it's an aquaculture product, this has to be indicated on the label for the consumer. And finally, you need to put the catch area. For instance, salmon caught at sea in Norway. And using the FAO regions, those who are familiar with seafood know them very well, the FAO regions laid down in that specific instrument. So this is how traceability is organized for a specific product. Fish, which is sold to the final consumer, must bear the information about the species of the method of production, and the catch area, amongst others. My second example is about eggs, category A eggs, that is eggs, table eggs that go to the final consumer. I'm not talking about eggs which will be used in the industrial process to make biscuits or whatever product. They need to bear a code. Every individual egg needs to bear a traceability code, which is a bit complicated. I call it the Da Vinci Code for eggs. It must first indicate the farming method. So for instance, O or 0 will identify an organic egg. One will indicate an egg produced in free range, 2 in barn, 3 in cage, and so on. Very important information these days for the consumers. Second, it needs to indicate the country of origin of the product. So in my example, the UK, United Kingdom, no longer in the EU until the end of the transition period. And finally, an indication number from the farm in which the egg has been produced. It's a code, a number, but you can find this number on the website of the competent authority. They give you a number, and if you want to know exactly which is the farm in which this egg was produced, you go to the website of your authority, and there, or the authority of the country where it's been produced, and you will find the number. There's optional information which can be put on the egg, like for instance the brand or the best before date. Best before date is not mandatory on the egg, but it's mandatory on the package. So if you have a pack of 6 eggs, the best before date must be on the package, and it may be repeated on the egg itself. This gives you an idea on how specific traceability requirements can be laid down for EU legislation for the purpose of traceability. As I said, I will give you some information also on the EU RASF, the Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, and on traces. RASF was actually created in the EU in 1979, but it got a legal basis in Regulation 178/2002. So before, it was like a voluntary system operated by the member states. Since 2002, it's mandatory for the member states to participate in the Rapid Alert System for food and feed. So it involves the 27 EU member states, 4 other countries, Iceland, Liechtenstein, Norway, Switzerland, and presumably the UK will join also under the free trade agreement that they're currently negotiating. The RASF is an exchange of notification between the members of the system. So it's closed information, restricted information, because this information must be exchanged rapidly. So there's no possibility of informing consumers and the like, because this information is not yet validated. The information is about a risk to human and animal health, about traceability information about that food, that product, and the measures which have been taken by the member states. And additional information will be fed in the system whenever they intervene. How does it work? It always starts with a notification from a member country. They receive information from a market control, a border control, or a business, a consumer, from the media. This information goes to the Director General for Health of the European Commission, DG Santé. They will make an assessment of the system, and they will transmit it to the other participants in the system, the member countries, EFSA, the 4 countries which are joined, and it will provide them for the possibility to give feedback, additional information on the system. It also goes to 3rd countries. It's mandatory under the regulation. If the Commission knows where the product has been exported, it must inform the non-EU countries, or the country from which the product has been imported in the EU, if it's a product originating in a non-EU country. Similarly, these countries can provide feedback to the Commission, which will be added to the RASF, and information will also be on a weekly basis without identifying the product, will be put on the web portal of the Commission and will be included in the annual report. And finally, the traces. Traces is an IT system for products of animal origin and plant products imported from non-EU countries or circulated within the EU with the information, most importantly, about the health certificate, the veterinary certificate for products of animal origin, the phytosanitary certificate for plant products, and it allows the business operators to use the system to fill part 1 of the health certificate directly feeding it into the system. So business operators can use traces, and then the authorities can connect to the system, fill in part 2 of the certificate, sign the certificate, and when they sign it, it will be automatically carried on to the important country, for instance, if it's a product of animal origin. So a fish operator can start the system, card the certificate, the competent authority will open it, fill part 2, and sign the certificate electronically. We can add electronic signature. Traces now also includes a module to fill in the phytosanitary certificate, and we are in discussion with the competent authorities, the plant protection department in the Department of Agriculture, to train them for using traces also for plant products. This is a very summary presentation of both RAS and traces, but of course there is a time constraint. So thank you very much for listening.